Testing your test. This is so strange topic and the name of to a talk, because most of the developers, or included me, create tests and everything continue working fine and you never find any problem. And why I need to test my test? I never create a test to check if my tests work fine. It's like a paradox. So let's start, introduce me, and after that, I will explain what is this testing your test. I am Sacco. I work with many languages since 2007, like Java, Kotlin, and whatever. I participate as technical reviewer on some of this editorial like Pack, Apress, and Mining. I recently published a book about Scala, the last version, and some theoretical practical courses, like takes a real scenario and show you a problem and you need to fix it. And here are my social networks. So at the end of this conference, if you have any doubts or problems with this particular topic, just send me an email or a tweet, and I will try to help you as soon as possible. So go directly to the problem that we try to solve it, or the situation. Most of us have a developed flow. When you start in a company and you have a project or an application on microservices, you need to introduce a feature or fix some kind of bug. And these kind of things have a flow. Perhaps you create a branch from your main branch and start to develop all the things. And at some point, you decide, okay, everything looks fine for me. I start to write the unit test or just create unit test with TDD or whatever. And when you run your test, you see that the code coverage looks more or less 85%, which is great. I mean, I have a good code coverage. And you create a merge request or pull request and send you to your partners to check if the source code is okay or not. your partner says everything looks fine. The source code it's okay for me. And the test, I don't have too many time to check if everything works fine, but Sonar say that you have good code coverage, so it's okay for me. And at some point you deploy in some environment. I put in the presentation production, but you can deploy it on the station or any environment. And at this point, an exception appears, an exception that you never see, because I mean, I developed something, I have tests that check if everything continue works fine, while this exception appear on my environment. And when this exception appears, there are many situations or many excuses that us with developers say, like, Sonar don't show me that there is a problem. I had many years of experience doing this. It's impossible that this happened. Perhaps it's something related with the environment or with the Docker that deploy the image, or the pipeline, perhaps. And many of these excuses appear when these kind of problems happen. And I have a big number of unit tests. I don't know, 400, 500 unit tests just for a small API, which is a lot. And I never have an exception on production. So for me, now, check again, please deploy the application again, because now this is not my problem. And just look at an example that these kind of things could happen if you have a poor quality of your unit test. You have two different examples of tests that don't check anything, because the first one, which is just a piece of code that of the application that we will use during this presentation, is just a service that interact with a repository on a Spring Boot, to obtain information about a country, and you only check that the response is not null, and you don't check nothing. And how are you sure that the response is okay? You can return just a new country DTO, a new instance without any value, and it's okay. The test passed, not failed. And the second example, more or less, is the same with a different approach. An exception appears, but you don't check anything on the exception. Not check the message, don't check the code, nothing. And the exception could appear for different motives. Perhaps you have a piece of code that throw in 3 different parts an exception, or call another method that throw this exception. But if you don't check which of these exceptions are the problem, you never detect this kind of problems. If you read more or less the Martin Fowler papers, which explain more or less all the time of unit test, the testing that exists, you see that there are unit tests, integration tests, functional testing, end-to-end testing, penetration testing, stress tests, and many more these kind of tests. Each of them cover a specific part of the application, but not all of them cover the same. The idea is that at the beginning, with your unit test, you cover all the possible scenarios and all the possible things that could happen in your application. The other parts of the pyramid need to check different things, like if the application works fine or not, if the entire pipeline of your platform works fine or not. It's not the responsibility of this kind of test check all the possible conditions on your API or on your source code. So if you have a problem with your unit test, the problem propagates in all the things and you never discover it. Of course, if you have luck, perhaps some integration test or some functional testing detect the problem. If not, you deploy these things or this source code on any of the environments and the problems appear. And now appear a new kind of unit test, or in fact is with a different name, is mutation test. And with what this mutation test? Well, the idea is validate our test and is in a way that you check if our tests are effective or not. It's not the same that you have a good cut coverage, like 90, 80%, 100% of the cut coverage, that the effectiveness of this test. What happens if I change something in the source code? If my unit test detect that there is a problem, need to fail. These things are the effectiveness that help me to detect possible problems when you introduce modifications. And well, when I say, okay, you need to run or create a new type of testing, you say, oh, another type of testing, I need to run again, write a lot of things, imply that I need to learn a lot of frameworks, a lot of syntax. Okay, I understand JUnit 5, Mockito, I don't know, in the case that you use Kotlin, I know Cotest, and it's a lot for me. But in this case, the mutation test not imply that you need to write any of these tests. The idea is you reuse the unit test that you created for your API, introducing little modifications in the logic that help to detect the problems. Little modification that don't affect the source code. This is important. It's not like the tool will change my source code in a different way. Like, okay, if I have an if that check if one number is greater than 0, and for some reason this tool changed my entire logic, and when I deploy the source code is changed. No, the idea is introducing modification without change the source code. Like, okay, I detect the problems, but you continue working with the same source code. And the pipeline of this mutation test is, first one, text the source code that you have on your repository, introduce modifications, like change one value of the condition, or add, remove some if-else condition, or call many times the same test, or something like that. So introduce each of them, each of these modifications are mutations. And after that, you execute the unit test, the original with the original source code. So you need to check if everything works fine. And after that, run the same unit test with the modification in the source code. After that, you need to compare the results to check what happened with the original and the mutators. Of course, all the tests need to pass to do this validation and check the results. And when you compare the result, if the results of the same test are different, one pass and the mutator fail, imply that, okay, for this kind of mutation, your test is effective. If at the same value, of course, both pass, you have a problem. So imagine that I change a condition, and if else, and the test continue working. Or in the case, that example that I showed you in a few slides ago, imagine that you introduce a new validation that throw an exception. If you don't check the message and the code of the exception, you never detect a problem. So it's important that you pay attention on the results of the mutation test. There are many types of this mutation test. One of them is the decision, which implies that modify the decision, invert the condition like greater than to less than, or change if you check if something is null, like different to null. These are so small modification. It's not a big modification. Change an condition to an or. These are simple, but imply many mutations, because in the case that you compare for a number greater than another one, you can do many mutations like greater than, equal, less than, and many more. So all these mutations, and the tool that you use it, consider it. The statements imply duplicate some sentences, like validations, change the order of the sentence. Imagine that you have a validation at the beginning of the method that check the parameters of the method, and what happens if I move this condition of this validation at the end, everything continue working or not, and remove some lines and see what happened. Of course, it's not I remove the lines and the source code not compiled. The idea is that the tool have a lot of logic and consider all the things to remove a line and everything continue working. Perhaps in some part of the source code, you assign a number or a value for a constant for a specific thing. And what happens if I remove it? Everything continue working or not? And these kind of things are so small to detect in a unit test. And the last one is the value, which implies that you change the initialization value. Imagine that you have a value, a variable that you init with 0 or null. What happens if I change this value for another things? And what happens if I execute many times the same unit test? Everything continue working or not? This is a good idea, because imagine that you are connect two different tests. And what happens if I execute many times one of them and see the impact in the other ones? I know that it's not a good practice, but could be happen that you have two unit tests that are connected and you put some annotation related with the order of the execution of that. So why I need to use it? This, well, first one, because increase your skill, help you to understand which are the problems that you introduce in your source code. So if you are conscious about that you have a problem, you introduce a problem with the unit test, the next time that you see the same condition on the same unit test, you say, okay, perhaps I need to introduce more validations or asserts to check if everything continue working or not. Increase the quality and reduce the risk to deploy something on production. Of course, reduce the time to do the reviews, because imagine that you have a tool that help you to detect possible problems in your unit test. If you need to check the source code or the peer review or merge request for another partner, you only need to put the focus in the source code to detect possible problem in the business logic on the way that the developer create the feature, not put the entire focus. Okay, perhaps there is a problem with the unit test or something is missing. You can delegate to Sonar to detect if the code coverage is okay or not, and another tool, which I will see in a moment, the check if the unit tests are okay or not. So there are problems. Everything is not a silver bullet, this mutation test, because consume a lot of resources, implying because you need to modify the source code many times and check, run the test for any of these mutations. So at some point, take a lot of resources, CPU and memory, and a lot of time to be executed. Imagine that you have, I don't know, 100 tests and takes 10 seconds. It's an example. And you need to introduce some modification like 10 times the number of tests. The time increase is not linear, perhaps it's exponential. And so you need to consider these things. It's not applicable also to libraries. You can test the Spring Boot framework, or I don't know, any of these library. You can only check your source code, because the idea of this tool is modify only the source code that is available for the tool in the same repository or in the same directory. And one thing to consider is that the developers need to know which things need to be tested, because if you have a lot of classes or a lot of elements in your application, it's not a good approach that check everything on the application, because I mean, takes a lot of time. So try to reduce the scope of the things to check. Now, the tools that are available for do this are, in the case of Kotlin or Java, is Pitest. So if you have an application on Java and you want, for some reason, do a migration to Kotlin, and you use Gradle or Maven and do all the effort to configure everything, there is not a problem, because you can export it and put in your new project and everything continue working if you use the same structure of the project, and it's okay. But not happen the same with Striker, which is available for Scala, JavaScript, and C#. So if you have a project on C# and for some reason want to migrate to Scala, the configuration is not the same. So you need to do some transformation of the configuration. So takes in consideration this. There are other tools in other language like Go, which is Go mutation, and on Rust. But the main problem with these tools are not supported or not have a company or a big community that it support. So for now, the two tools that are used for most of the developers are Pitest and Striker. In our case, that is Pitest because we need to use in a Java project. Now, I create a practical example that you can download for this repository on GitHub, which contains a Sonar and Jenkins and microservices, with the idea that you see or you have of the entire ecosystem to see the problems and fix it. It's not just the presentation and nothing more. I try to give you some scenario that you can download and test, and it's not necessary that you create the entire thing. So let me go to the repository to show you that this is the repository. This is the configuration of the Sonar and Jenkins, the microservices. Here is a little explanation about the requirement, the structure of the project, the technologies, how you can run the CI, and the consideration about the memory and how you can access. And go directly to the scenario. I have a pipeline here, which have 6 steps. The most important are the unit test and the quality, and the package that for now is not relevant. And here is my API, which, as you can see, is have a coverage of 80 and 87, but the overall is 80, which is great. It's not a problem. And now I will show you on my IntelliJ the application which I imported. And if you run all the unit tests, which takes time, don't pay attention to exception, and you have all of these tests that pass, which is great. And now it's in production. So let's show you how an exception or how a problem could appear. So I will run my application. Just a minute, a second. It's a Spring Boot application, but you can use it on any framework. The idea is to show you an example. You can use mutation tests on Quarkus or Ktor or whatever. So I have, this URL, which show you a swagger of the API that have 2 different groups of endpoints. One are connected with the city and another to the countries. So you can save countries and you can return the information of the countries. The countries need to follow the pattern that you need to have 2 letters. So we can do a test. What happens if I add another letter, 3, okay, not found. And what happens if I put a valid country, as I mentioned here? Okay, we have a problems here. Everything is null, but okay, could be an exception or could be something on the database. Let's try it with another one. The same, and just one more, the same. Here is a problem. So if you go, let's stop the application because now it's not relevant. I go directly to the controller, the country controller, and do a lot of validation. Here is the validation about the size of the length of the code. If you go directly to the services Okay, here is a problem. I return a new country. I know this could be a possible exception, but imagine that for some reason you need to check something and you put this just for debugging purpose, and you forgot remove this line and put this, which is the line that you need to return. And you have test. So why this test don't check this? Well, let me show you the test. Here is the problem. You don't check nothing. This could happen. It's not so strange that see this kind of problem. Okay, that is so obvious that this is a problem. But perhaps when you have a big number of lines, a big number of controller services or logic to see, this problem can appear. So how you can solve this? Let's close everything here and we go to use Pitest. So Pitest is a plugin. For some reason, I can edit. Yes, for some reason, let me just, for some reason, I can do the modifications. I don't know why. It's just a second. Now, yes. Okay, it's a plugin. So I need to add the group ID, which is our Pitest. Okay, it's not this one. It's this one. IntelliShade tried to help me, but it's not a good idea. And the version, I think, is okay. This is helpful. And okay, this plugin ran the mutation. I will continue fine, but I need to see the report and to detect the problem in some way. So the plugin offered to you the chance to export the result on many formats. So let me output the format, which in my case, I want to have an HTML. And just for the purpose that if in the case that you want to export the results to some tool like Sonar, the HTML is not the best option. So you need to export in another format, which is works fine with this. In fact, there is a specific plugin on Sonar to interact with Pitest. And the second thing that you need to consider is, okay, which classes I want to mutate. So for now, I want to check all the CAM, TBA, flights, API, catalog, everything on my source code. And okay, the next, which is the last thing that we need, sorry, is which is the location of the source of the test that I need to run to check if everything continue working or not. So in this case, will be not the same location or the same package. So just in case, include both of them. And when you do all these things, the next step is run the mutation test. So for that reason, I write this command on Maven. This is a command and include the plugin, the Pitest Maven, and the goal is mutation coverage. So remember, as you, I don't, sorry. So the first thing that the plugin try to do is run all the unit tests to check if everything works fine. And after that, start to do the modifications on the source code. This could happen, sorry. Because I need to stop the Jenkins and Sonar on my machine. I use a lot of memory. Sorry. So then now it's working. Oh, I don't know why. Maybe I need to clean the even let me do it. Clean compile, because it will happen. This plugin is have a lot of problems depending of the version of the JDK that you use. In my case, I changed the JDK recently to another from Microsoft to cover some specific issues on my company. So let me. Oh shit. It's not a problem related with the JK, my fault. And could happen to you if you don't read exactly the goal. There is a problem here related with the Pitest, and that don't include the support to JUnit 5. So if you run the application with this particular configuration and not include the support to JUnit 5, because I have a test using JUnit 5, this exception will appear. So there is not a lot of documentation on the official site about this problem. So I Googled on many things, on many places like Stack Overflow and some strange forums. And the solution for this is including a dependency. This dependency is, okay, 1.5, which is the version. And now, if everything works fine, and there are one of them for test NJ, and I think there are some of them for other tools because there is the same problem. So now, as you can see, there are some mutation on the unit tests that are executed. All these things are all the available mutators that the plugin will execute or will use during on the different part of our source code. Now, you have the results, takes 70 seconds. As you can see, you can say which of the mutation are executed, but this is not great to see. Okay, it takes 30 seconds. But now the most important thing is see the results in a way that you can understand. So let me here. On the target, the tool create a directory which is PyReport with the timestamp. So anytime that you run this command, will create a new folder with this structure, and you have the report about the problems. So let's open in a browser, in my case on Chrome. Okay, now you have more or less the same report that when you use Hakoko or the other tools, and you have all the package, the coverage, and the mutators. Here is like a summary about the strength of our test, the mutators, coverage, which is so bad, and all the package. And if you go inside, you can see, okay, the coverage and the mutators. If I enter off one of them, you see more or less the same report that other tools which show you on green which things are covered and are okay, and on red which things are bad. In our case, the red things implies that what happens if I do modifications and if everything continue working or not. In this case, for example, one of the mutator removed this validation and everything continue working. So the test pass with the mutation. And this is the problem that you can find. So this is great, but it's a lot of things. In my case, DTO, enum, and exception could be not great to test it. So a possible thing that you can do is, okay, just include some particular package like controller. And I will do the same to service. And I need to do the same here, because if not, we'll run all the tests, which is not a good idea. I need to include something here. And if you run again, the main problem with this, when each time that you run this mutation test, is like, okay, I don't have like an historical thing. I need to run again everything and check if everything continue working or not. But there is some possible solution for this. Let me first show you this. Okay, this time takes less time. And I will open on my browser and Chrome. And now, as you can see, the number of classes or the package are reduced just on 2 of them. The others are excluded. Let's show you a problem here. I have a controller, which I have a method that only do a redirect and nothing more. And for me, it's not relevant to test. So if for some reason you want to exclude it, this particular method, you can exclude it classes, or you can exclude methods. So if you want to exclude method, you can put the name of the method. And I will show you one more thing. Remember that we have this directory with a name that's so strange. So remember that I will exclude this method, and also I will put all the reports in just one folder. I will say that for me, the next time that I will execute this thing, all this structure will appear here and not create me this particular thing. And also I exclude this method. The next thing is I will show you is how improve this a little. Okay, 20 seconds. And now, as you can see, the number of directories reduced a little. Okay, browser, Chrome, controller. And what happened with my document controller? Well, I exclude one method, which is the only method that exists in the class. If I exclude the analysis of this method, that makes sense that analyze this class. So the tool have some kind of ability to detect, okay, which is the number of method that I can do mutations. 0, okay, not including the report because that makes sense. And okay, I mentioned that takes time, and perhaps could be a good option at some point. Run the test, but take in consideration the previous run. So I can add this parameter, which you can include it here also. True. And the idea of this parameter is like create a bitahura So the first time that you execute it, let me do it, takes the entire time to do all the things, and the next execution consider only the modification. So the time is reduced a little, because only check if your source code you introduce some modifications. So the first time, perhaps 20 seconds, and the second time need to be less than 20 seconds. This is great when you have a pipeline and you need to improve the times to execute a pipeline and to execute this kind of things. Check 20 seconds the first execution, 14 the second. So let's remove this. The next thing that I want to mention is this tool have an engine behind the scenes. The engine is the thing that do all the modification on the source code. There are two of them. One of them is Gregor, which I showed you recently on the example, which introduce all the modification inside the source code, do the modification on the if condition, remove source, remove condition, add a condition, execute many times the unit test, all the things that you see. But this kind of engine takes a lot of time. For some reason, you don't take 20, 50, 1 hour to execute all the mutation tests. So there are another engine, which is called the Pitest, which have the idea, let me show you, have the idea they only modify the response of the API. What happens if I remove all the instructions of my method and only change the return for something, return a null or return or something empty. So reduce the number of mutation a lot. So you need to include the change of the mutation engine, and you need to include the dependency here. And I think if I have a previous history, could be fail because it's not the same engine. Like, let me check. It's not. I will clean the target. Okay, start to, okay, 20 seconds. And let's go directly to the index to show you the results. Okay. The mutation coverage is so bad, but makes sense because I removed all the instructions of the method and everything continue working, which is so bad. On the services, there are some of them that had a good are effective coverage, like this one, but this one, this, and I remove this line and everything continue working. These kind of problems are detected for both engines. Of course, the time to execute one or instead on another one are so different, and there are many of these engines. So how this impact in some way on the pipeline? You, as a suggestion, please try to don't include this in a pipeline to deploy something on production, because it takes a lot of time. This is like an example, but if you have an application with 400 unit tests, perhaps takes 20, 50, 40, I don't know, a lot of time to execute it. So it's impractical. So for that reason, try to create another pipeline just to execute the unit test, the mutation test, and have the report on Sonar and take actions after that, but don't include on the deploy pipeline. So to recap my presentation, let me go back. Presentation, sorry. And where I use it on validators, adapter, and business logic. which are the most relevant part of the application. DTOs, entities, exceptions, external logic don't make sense. In fact, DTOs and entities perhaps only have set and get and hash code and to a string. For example, a good candidate to exclude method could be this hash code and to a string or equal because they are generated directly for the IntelliJ. Places to use it are things or places that are so relevant that a problem on the source code could produce a lot of loss. In the case of medical, airplanes, banks, crypto, electrical things, or Wall Street. Best practices, not run on every commit because decrease a lot the velocity of deploy. Limited the number of mutation. You can do it on the plugin. Report the results because you need to have or track the possible problems. And there are some features which you need to take in consideration that you can run at the same time. Many of these mutation depends of the engine and consider that consume a lot of memory and CPU of your pipeline or your machine, and reduce only the things that that you need to check is not relevant. As I mentioned, check if a DTO works or not, and analyze the result because this plugin could produce false positive. And you need, in this case, you need to reduce the scope or exclude a method or a class because a lot of problems could appear. As a summary, well, mutation test is an alternative way to detect problems on your test. And it's not necessary to run again or write any of these tests. It's just reuse the things that you are created. It's available on multiple language, and consider don't run every time on the pipeline. I mentioned a lot of time because I saw many times as a step on the pipeline that you execute or someone execute the mutation test and say, oh, my pipeline takes a lot of time to be executed. And questions for now. I think I have one. Yeah, the mutation, the idea is you have the source code, and for some reason the tool generate like many copies of this source code with some little modifications. So the first time run your source code with the test, the unit test. The second time you don't see, but the second time you takes the mutations of the source code and execute with the same unit test and check the results. This is the idea of this. So if the first time the unit test fail, the mutation test don't execute it because it doesn't make sense. I don't have anything to confirm if I have a good quality of my test or not. And so this is the answer for the question. Or if anyone don't have another question, it's everything from my side. And I finish the presentation. So thank you for assist to this talk about the testing your test, and please try to introduce it in your project or APIs.